Your pension money belongs to this family now, Dad. $25 a week for your personal needs. Take it or find somewhere else to live. My own son's words hit me like ice water that Halloween evening, his cold calculation turning our family dinner into a nightmare I never saw coming. After 35 years, welding aircraft engines, after sacrificing everything to put him through college, after losing Rita and moving in to help with expenses, Brandon treated me like a tenant in my own home. When I woke up the next morning to check my bank balance, I discovered he'd stolen my entire Social Security deposit while I slept. $1,847 vanished overnight, leaving me with $23 to my name. That's when this 62-year-old widower realized my son had made the biggest mistake of his life because he never expected what I was about to do next. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. The Halloween decorations scattered across our Brookside neighborhood looked cheerful enough that October evening, Jacko, lanterns grinning from every porch, and fake cobwebs draped across mailboxes. But inside our modest two-story house on Maple Street, a different kind of horror was about to unfold. The scent of Vanessa's pot roast filled our dining room, mixing with the crisp autumn air that drifted through slightly open windows. Orange and black streamers hung from the light fixture above our oak table, where my 6-year-old grandchildren, Sophia and Tyler, sat picking at their mashed potatoes with the distracted energy of kids already thinking about tomorrow's trick-or-treating. I straightened my shoulders in the chair I'd occupied for nearly 4 years, ever since Rita's accident had left me a widower, and Brandon had suggested I move in temporarily to help with expenses. The decision had seemed practical, then a way to contribute to the household while staying close to my grandchildren. Now, watching Brandon count through a stack of papers with the calculating intensity I recognized from his warehouse management job, I felt the first stirrings of unease in my chest. "Dad, we need to talk about your situation here." Brandon's voice carried that particular tone he used when discussing logistics at work, cold and efficient. His wife Vanessa glanced up from cutting Tyler's meat, her brown eyes flickering with something that might have been warning or apology. The twins sensed the adult tension building around their innocent dinner, their small hands slowing as they reached for their milk glasses. My situation, I kept my voice level, though my pulse had begun to quicken. 43 years of marriage to Rita had taught me to recognize the moments when family conversations took dangerous turns, and Brandon's carefully arranged papers suggested this was one of them. He slid a document across the table toward me, his finger tapping against what I could see was a bank statement. "Your American Airlines pension started last month. $2,100. That's good money, Dad, but you're not thinking about it correctly." The words hit me like cold water. I'd worked 35 years in the maintenance hangar at Tulsa International Airport, welding aircraft frames and engine mounts in Oklahoma heat that could reach 110 degrees in summer. Every paycheck had included pension contributions, small amounts that added up over decades of honest labor. That money represented more than just retirement income. It symbolized the dignity I'd earned through sweat and dedication. "Brandon, that's my pension. I earned every dollar of it." My hands remained steady on the table, but something fundamental was shifting in the room's atmosphere, like the pressure change that precedes Oklahoma thunderstorms. "Dad, listen to me carefully." Brandon leaned forward, his voice dropping to the patronizing tone he might use with difficult customers at the warehouse. "This house costs money to maintain. The mortgage payment is $1,800 monthly. Utilities run another $300. Food insurance repairs, it all adds up. You think your Social Security covers that?" Sophia started crying softly as her father's voice rose, while Tyler grabbed her hand under the table, in the protective instinct twins often share. Vanessa reached across to comfort them, her nursing training evident in the gentle way she assessed their emotional state. But her loyalty was clearly torn between defending her husband's position and protecting the children from witnessing their grandfather's humiliation. "Son, you have no right to my pension money." The simple statement carried the weight of 3.5 decades spent building aircraft that carried families safely across the country. I'd helped construct the very planes that connected people to their loved ones, and now my own son was treating me like a tenant in the house I'd helped purchase. Brandon's expression shifted through surprise anger, and then calculating coldness that reminded me uncomfortably of his teenage years, when he'd learned to manipulate situations to his advantage. "Right, I have every right. This house belongs to the family now, Dad. If you want to keep living here, your pension goes toward household expenses. I'll give you $50 a week for personal needs. Take it or find somewhere else to live." The kitchen seemed to shrink around us as the full scope of his ultimatum became clear. My grandson Tyler was openly sobbing now while Sophia buried her face against her mother's shoulder. These innocent children shouldn't witness their grandfather being reduced to a dependent, but Brandon seemed beyond caring about their emotional well-being. I pushed back from the table slowly, my joints protesting after another day of helping with yard work that Brandon claimed was too busy to handle himself. 62 years of living had taught me when battles could be won and when strategic retreat was necessary. This moment clearly belonged to the latter category. Without another word, I walked past my son's stunned expression and grabbed my jacket from the hallway closet. The front door closed behind me with a finality that echoed through the house. As I stepped into Tulsa's October evening, my breath forming small clouds in the cooling air. The October air carried the scent of burning leaves and distant barbecue smoke as I walked aimlessly through our Brookside neighborhood. Jack-o'-lanterns flickered on porches around me, their carved grins seeming to mock the family nightmare I'd just escaped. The sidewalk beneath my feet was cracked from decades of Oklahoma weather, much like the foundation of trust I'd thought existed between my son and me. Each house I passed told stories of ordinary families preparing for Halloween night. Through lit windows, I could see parents helping children into costumes, couples sharing evening news over coffee, grandparents reading bedtime stories to wide-eyed listeners. Normal family scenes that highlighted just how far my own situation had deteriorated from the American dream I'd worked 35 years to build. My mind kept returning to Brandon's cold calculation as he demanded control over my pension. $2,100 monthly represented more than just retirement income. It symbolized every early morning I'd driven to Tulsa International Airport, every aircraft engine mount I'd welded in, sweltering hangar heat, every overtime shift I'd worked to save for his college education. The boy I'd raised to value hard work and integrity had somehow transformed into a man who viewed his father's earned benefits as family property to be redistributed according to his financial needs. The Methodist Church on the corner of Maple and 3rd Street stood quiet in the darkness, its familiar steeple silhouetted against the orange glow of streetlights. Pastor Williams had counseled me through Rita's death 2 years ago, helping me navigate the grief that threatened to consume my faith in God's plan. Perhaps he could offer guidance for this new crisis, though the betrayal of one's own child seemed to fall outside the scope of normal pastoral care. I found myself walking toward downtown Tulsa, where the Art Deco buildings stood as monuments to the city's oil boom prosperity. This was the same route I'd driven for decades to reach the airport back, when American Airlines maintenance work provided steady employment and predictable advancement. The irony wasn't lost on me that the pension I'd earned through that faithful service was now being treated as a family entitlement by the son who'd benefited most from my career stability. My phone buzzed insistently in my jacket pocket. Brandon's name appeared on the screen, but I let the call go to voicemail. Whatever apology or further demands he might offer, I wasn't ready to hear them. The time for family negotiations had passed the moment he'd claimed ownership of money I'd earned through honest labor. The downtown Social Security office building loomed ahead, its federal architecture suggesting permanence and official authority that suddenly seemed appealing. Tomorrow morning I would walk through those doors and file the paperwork that would make my retirement official and irreversible. Brandon could threaten and manipulate all he wanted, but he couldn't prevent me from claiming benefits I'd earned through decades of contributions to the system. A group of teenagers in Halloween costumes passed me on the sidewalk, their laughter echoing off the empty office buildings. Their carefree energy reminded me of Brandon at that age, when he'd still looked up to his father with genuine respect, rather than calculating how to exploit my resources for his own benefit. Where had I gone wrong in raising him? Rita would have known how to handle this situation with the wisdom that comes from years of teaching children to understand right from wrong. But Rita was gone, and I was facing this family crisis alone. The realization brought a familiar ache to my chest, the same hollow feeling that had accompanied me through 2 years of widowhood. She'd always been the family diplomat, smoothing over conflicts with patient conversation and gentle guidance. Without her influence, Brandon had apparently felt free to reveal the selfish nature that marriage and fatherhood had temporarily concealed. The walk back to Maple Street took 40 minutes, during which I made several important decisions. First, I would file for my American Airlines pension benefits tomorrow morning, regardless of Brandon's objections. Second, I would seek legal advice about my rights as a homeowner and pension recipient. Third, I would stop enabling my son's financial irresponsibility by accepting his demands for control over my retirement income. The house was dark when I returned, suggesting that Brandon and his family had retreated to their bedrooms, rather than wait for my return. I climbed the stairs to my small room quietly, already planning tomorrow's visit to the Social Security office. Sleep came surprisingly easily, perhaps because I'd finally found the resolve to fight back against my son's betrayal. Dawn broke gray and overcast across Tulsa as I woke in my small bedroom, the events of last night's confrontation still fresh in my memory. The house remained silent around me, Brandon's family avoiding the kitchen where our argument had unfolded just 12 hours earlier. I dressed quietly in my best slacks and button-down shirt, the same Navy outfit I'd worn to Rita's memorial service. Today felt equally significant, marking the beginning of my fight for financial independence. The federal building downtown housed the Social Security Administration office, and I'd researched the bus route carefully during my restless night. The city transit system served downtown Tulsa, efficiently connecting working-class neighborhoods like Brookside to the government offices where ordinary citizens conducted their official business. At 62, I qualified for early retirement benefits, though the reduced payments would be permanent rather than the full amount available at 67. The Route 15 bus arrived precisely at 8:30, its diesel engine rumbling as other early commuters climbed aboard. An elderly woman with a floral scarf smiled at me as I took the seat across from her, her weathered hands clutching a manila folder similar to the one tucked under my arm. Cold morning for October, she observed, adjusting her purse strap with the careful movements of someone managing arthritis. Winter comes early some years, I replied, though my response felt prophetic somehow, as if I was speaking about more than just Oklahoma weather patterns. Tulsa's downtown landscape rolled past the scratched bus windows as we traveled along Riverside Drive. The Arkansas River reflected the overcast sky like pewter, while office workers hurried along sidewalks toward buildings that housed insurance companies, law firms, and energy corporations. This city had survived the oil bust of the 1982nd and reinvented itself as a diversified economy. Perhaps I could manage a similar transformation at 62. The federal building's security checkpoint required removing my belt and shoes, a process that made me feel simultaneously important and vulnerable. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over rows of plastic chairs where other seniors waited with their own manila folders and hopeful expressions. The bureaucratic atmosphere reminded me of military processing during my brief Army service in the late 70s, the same mixture of official efficiency and human patience. Eugene Caldwell, a middle-aged Hispanic woman wearing professional attire and a kind smile, approached my seat after a 20-minute wait. I'm Maria Santos. Sorry for the delay this morning. Her office was small but organized, with family photos sharing desk space with neat stacks of government forms. She gestured for me to sit across from her metal desk while she opened my file on her computer screen. Let's start with Form SSA 1-year application for retirement insurance benefits, she explained, handing me several pages of paperwork. I'll also need Form SSA 827 for authorization to obtain records from American Airlines regarding your employment history. The paperwork felt overwhelming initially, but Maria's patient explanations made each section manageable. My 35-year employment record with American Airlines impressed her. The documentation showing steady work, reliable income, and substantial contributions to the Social Security system through decades of honest labor. Mr. Caldwell, your work record is exceptional, she said, reviewing the employment verification that American Airlines had faxed earlier that morning. You've definitely earned a well-deserved retirement. The words carried more emotional weight than I'd expected, validation from an official source that my career had meant something beyond just earning paychecks. Finally, I'll have some independence, I admitted the statement, slipping out before I could stop it. Maria's expression softened with understanding. Family pressures, she asked gently, probably having heard similar stories from other seniors, trapped between their own needs and their children's financial expectations. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady while explaining Brandon's ultimatum. She'd probably encountered this situation before, adult children who viewed their parents' retirement benefits as family resources to be managed rather than individual rights to be respected. My phone buzzed insistently during our appointment, Brandon's name appearing repeatedly on the screen. I let each call go to voicemail, focusing instead on the paperwork that would secure my financial future. Processing typically takes 6 to 8 weeks, Maria explained after I'd completed the final forms. Your first payment should arrive around mid-December, assuming everything processes smoothly. The amount will be $1,847 monthly reduced, because you're filing before full retirement age. The bus ride home felt different, somehow lighter, despite Brandon's continued opposition. I'd taken the first concrete step toward independence, and the official paperwork in my folder represented more than just retirement benefits. It symbolized reclaiming control over my own future after decades of putting family needs before personal security. The 15th of December arrived with the kind of crisp winter morning that makes Tulsa residents grateful for central heating and hot coffee. I'd been checking our mailbox daily for 3 weeks, my anticipation building with each passing day since Maria Santos had promised my first Social Security payment would arrive around mid-month. The routine had become almost ritualistic, coffee first in the kitchen, while Brandon and his family maintained their careful distance, then the short walk to our mailbox at the end of Maple Street's tree-lined driveway. Over the past 6 weeks, an uneasy truce had settled over our household. Brandon made no further demands about my pension money, perhaps hoping I'd forgotten his ultimatum or changed my mind about retirement. Vanessa continued her part-time nursing shifts while managing the twins' school schedules, her polite but distant interactions suggesting she understood the gravity of her husband's financial overreach. The children had returned to their normal routines, though I occasionally caught them watching me with the careful attention kids develop when they sense adult tensions they can't fully understand. Today felt different somehow. The mailman's truck rumbled down our street earlier than usual, and I could hear the familiar squeak of mailbox hinges opening and closing as he made his deliveries. Through our front window I watched him approach our house with his leather satchel, his breath forming white clouds in the December air. The envelope bearing the Social Security Administration's return address sat nestled between utility bills and holiday advertisements like a prize waiting to be claimed. My hands trembled slightly as I carried it inside, closing myself in my bedroom before opening it with the care reserved for important documents. The check was real. $1, $847, made out to Eugene Caldwell, with the official seal and signature that made it legally valid. More than I'd calculated during my napkin mathematics over the past weeks, actually. The neat printing seemed to validate every early morning I'd driven to Tulsa International Airport, every aircraft engine mount I'd welded in Oklahoma, heat every overtime shift I'd worked to build a secure retirement. "This is my money," I whispered to the empty room, the words carrying the weight of 35 years of honest labor, earned through sweat and dedication. The walk to First National Bank on Brookside Avenue took 15 minutes, during which I kept touching my shirt pocket to ensure the check remained safely tucked away. The December morning was warm enough that I didn't need my heavy winter coat, and the lighter jacket felt symbolic of the burden lifting from my shoulders with each step toward financial independence. Jennifer Martinez had been my teller for nearly 10 years, watching me deposit American Airlines paychecks and withdraw modest amounts for household expenses during the years when Rita was still alive and our family functioned normally. Her face brightened with genuine pleasure when she saw me approaching her window. "Mr. Caldwell, good morning. How are you doing today?" Her professional smile carried the warmth that comes from years of serving the same customers through life's various transitions. "Better than I've been in months, Jennifer." I slid the check through the security glass, feeling a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since Rita's death. "I'd like to deposit this, please, but keep $200 in cash." Her eyes widened as she read the amount and the Social Security designation. "Congratulations on your retirement, Mr. Caldwell. You've certainly earned it after all those years at American Airlines." The deposit process required additional verification for such a large amount, but Jennifer handled everything efficiently. The counting machine's mechanical rhythm as it sorted bills created a satisfying soundtrack to my newfound independence. She arranged the cash in neat 20s and 50s that felt substantial and real in ways that electronic transfers never could. "Would you like a receipt for this transaction?" she asked, sliding the deposit slip across the counter along with my cash. "Absolutely." I accepted both items, tucking the money carefully into my wallet, while studying the receipt that proved my retirement income was finally secure. The bank balance showed more money than I'd controlled since before Rita's medical expenses had depleted our savings. The walk home passed in a blur of contentment mixed with strategic planning. $200 would cover my personal expenses for several weeks while I decided on my next steps. Perhaps a small apartment across town somewhere Brandon's financial manipulations couldn't reach. Maybe even a modest vacation to visit my sister in Colorado, something Rita and I had always planned but never managed during our working years. That evening I cooked myself a simple dinner and ate it in peaceful silence while Brandon worked late at the warehouse. The check stub sat on my dresser like a trophy, representing the first step toward reclaiming control over my own life after months of financial uncertainty and family manipulation. Morning sunlight streamed through my bedroom curtains, painting golden rectangles across the worn carpet as I stretched and smiled. Yesterday's triumph still warmed my chest like hot coffee on a cold day. $1, 847 my bank account safely deposited, and beyond Brandon's grasping hands. Today would bring planning, maybe apartment hunting, definitely the freedom I'd worked 35 years to earn. The house felt different, somehow filled with possibilities that retirement had finally unlocked. Birds sang outside my window, their cheerful melodies matching my optimistic mood as I swung my legs over the bed's edge and reached for my phone to check my account balance before breakfast. A simple routine that had become pleasant since yesterday's deposit. The First National Bank app loaded slowly on my older smartphone, the screen flickering as it connected to their servers. My checking account appeared first, showing the transaction history from yesterday's visit. Jennifer Martinez had processed everything correctly. The deposit clearly listed at 2:47 p.m. for $1.847, but the current balance stopped my breath completely. $23.18. I stared at the numbers, certain the app had malfunctioned or displayed someone else's account information. This had to be a mistake, some computer error that would resolve itself if I refreshed the screen. My finger trembled as I pulled down to reload the page, watching the spinning wheel that indicated the system was updating. $23.18. The same impossible number stared back at me, mocking yesterday's joy with digital precision. My hands shook as I scrolled through the transaction history, searching for some explanation that would make sense of this financial nightmare. There it was. A withdrawal at 11:47 p.m. last night for $1.823.82, leaving exactly $23.18 in my account. The transaction was listed as ATM withdrawal with Umanara, authorized user, which meant someone with access to my account had systematically stolen nearly every penny while I slept peacefully dreaming of independence. My chest tightened as the implications crystallized into horrible understanding. Only one person in this house knew about my Social Security deposit. Only one person had been desperate enough to claim ownership of my pension money just 6 weeks ago. Only one person possessed both the motive and opportunity to commit this devastating theft: Brandon. The realization hit like ice water in my veins, but I forced myself to consider the evidence rationally. No signs of break-in meant inside job. The timing suggested someone who knew exactly when the money would be available. The precision of leaving just enough to avoid closing the account showed calculated planning rather than impulsive desperation. Heart hammering against my ribs, I called the bank's customer service line with shaking fingers. The automated system cheerfully informed me that my account balance was $23.18, as if this was perfectly normal rather than the destruction of my retirement security. First National Bank, this is David speaking. How can I help you today? This is Eugene Caldwell. Someone stole money from my checking account last night. Nearly $1,800. My voice cracked with the effort of remaining calm while my world crumbled around me. I'm sorry to hear that, Mr. Caldwell. Let me pull up your account information. Keyboard clicking filled the silence as David accessed my records. I see the withdrawal you're referring to. It was made at the ATM on Brookside Avenue at 11:47 p.m. using your debit card and PIN number. Do you still have your card in your possession? I fumbled for my wallet, finding the debit card exactly where I'd left it after yesterday's bank visit. Yes, it's right here. Then, someone else knows your PIN number, sir. This appears to be fraud committed by someone with access to your account information. You'll need to file a police report and bring it to the bank so we can begin the investigation process. The call ended with promises of investigation and eventual restitution, but those words felt hollow against the immediate reality of having $23 to my name, instead of the $1.847 I'd earned through honest work. Someone I trusted had waited until I was vulnerable, then struck with surgical precision to steal my financial independence. Downstairs, I could hear familiar morning sounds, dishes clinking, coffee brewing, children's voices preparing for school. Normal family life continuing while my world crumbled upstairs. Brandon's voice carried clearly through the thin walls, discussing weekend plans with Vanessa as if he hadn't committed felony theft just hours earlier. Time to confront the thief, who happened to be my own son. The kitchen sounds drew me downstairs like a magnet pulls metal, the ordinary symphony of breakfast that had played every morning for the past 4 years. Vanessa stood at the counter buttering toast, while Sophia and Tyler hurried through bowls of cereal, their backpacks already positioned by their chairs for the school rush. Brandon sat reading the Tulsa World coffee, steaming beside his plate of scrambled eggs. He looked up casually as I entered the doorway, my phone clutched in my trembling fist, showing the devastating bank balance of $23.18. His expression carried perfect normalcy, but something cold flickered behind his eyes that made my stomach clench with dread. Morning, Dad. Sleep well, his tone suggested nothing more significant than discussing weather patterns, as if he hadn't systematically robbed his own father just hours earlier. Brandon, someone stole my money last night. My voice remained steady despite the rage building in my chest like steam in an overheated engine. $1,800 gone from my account. Vanessa's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips while the children's spoons stopped moving, their innocent faces turning toward the adult crisis brewing around their breakfast table. But Brandon simply folded his newspaper with deliberate precision and set it beside his plate. Nobody stole anything, Dad. His words hit like physical blows, each syllable driving deeper into my chest. I took your money. It's rent for living in this house. The kitchen seemed to shrink around us as the full scope of his betrayal became clear. Sophia started crying softly while Tyler slid lower in his chair, trying to disappear from the warfare erupting between his grandfather and father. These innocent children shouldn't witness such calculated cruelty, but Brandon seemed beyond caring about their emotional well-being. That's theft, Brandon. My Social Security money that I earned through 35 years of honest work. The injustice burned in my throat like acid, transforming grief into something harder and more focused. He stood slowly, his height advantage suddenly menacing in our small kitchen. When he smiled, it held no warmth, only the cold calculation of a predator sizing up wounded prey. Prove it in court, old man. Brandon reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick fold of bills. My bills. My money earned through decades of welding aircraft engines in Oklahoma heat. This house costs real money to maintain. Mortgage, utilities, food, insurance. You think $23 covers your share. This is stealing from your own father. My hands clenched into fists as I watched him count several 20s with theatrical slowness like scraps thrown to a dog. Watch your tone. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper that made Vanessa flinch. I'll give you $25 a week for personal expenses. That's generous, considering you don't pay for food utilities or housing maintenance. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice barely audible above the children's sniffling. Brandon, maybe we should discuss this privately. Stay out of this, Vanessa. He silenced her with a look that promised consequences for interference. Dad needs to understand how things work in the real world. Tyler was sobbing openly now while Sophia buried her face against her mother's shoulder, their young minds struggling to process the destruction of everything they'd thought they understood about family love and protection. They were learning lessons about power and cruelty that no 6-year-old should witness. Brandon tucked the stolen money back into his pocket and returned to his breakfast, as if nothing had happened. $25 a week, Dad. Take it or find somewhere else to live with your $23. The ultimatum hung in the kitchen air like smoke from a house fire, poisoning everything it touched. Rage built inside my chest, but I forced myself to remain standing while Brandon resumed eating his eggs with theatrical calmness. The children needed to escape this toxic demonstration of adult betrayal. Get your things ready for school, I whispered to Sophia and Tyler, my voice gentle despite the fury consuming me. They hurried toward the hallway, their small faces streaked with tears that broke something fundamental in my heart. I'm sorry you had to see this. I called after their retreating forms, then turned back to face the son who'd transformed into a stranger overnight. Brandon finished his breakfast with deliberate slowness, checking his watch and gathering papers for another day of honest work at the warehouse. The irony wasn't lost on me that he'd built his career on managing other people's property while systematically stealing from his own father. Think about my offer, Dad, he said, kissing Vanessa goodbye like any normal husband heading to the office. $25 a week is more than most nursing homes provide for spending money. He left at exactly 8:30 his car, starting and driving toward downtown Tulsa, as if this morning's cruelty was just another routine family discussion. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching through the window, as my son disappeared down Maple Street, already planning my escape from his control. The silence that followed Brandon's departure felt heavier than Oklahoma summer air, thick with the weight of decisions that couldn't be undone. Vanessa had retreated upstairs to help the twins prepare for school, her footsteps careful and deliberate, as if she was walking through a house made of glass. I stood in the kitchen doorway for several minutes, listening to the ordinary sounds of family life continuing around the wreckage of my relationship with my son. $25 a week. The phrase echoed in my mind like a broken record, each repetition driving home the reality of my situation. After 35 years of honest work, after raising Brandon from infancy through college graduation, after sacrificing my own comfort to ensure his success, I'd been reduced to a dependent receiving an allowance in my own home. But this wasn't my home anymore, was it? Brandon had made that clear with his cold ultimatum and calculated theft. The house I'd helped purchase through years of overtime shifts and careful budgeting had become a prison where my jailer happened to share my last name. Upstairs, I packed methodically but thoroughly. One suitcase held my essential clothes identification papers and the few bank documents that proved my financial identity. Rita's photograph went into my shirt pocket close to my heart where she'd always belonged during our 43 years of marriage. Everything else, furniture, books, lifetime accumulations of domestic comfort, would stay behind as tribute to my son's greed. The $23 in my wallet felt pathetic, but it was honestly mine in ways that nothing else in this house could claim anymore. I'd earned every penny through my own labor, unlike Brandon, who'd built his comfortable lifestyle on his father's financial foundation without acknowledgement or gratitude. Vanessa appeared in my doorway as I snapped the suitcase closed her nurse's training, evident in the way she assessed my emotional state with professional concern. "Eugene, please don't do this. Maybe we can work something out with Brandon when he gets home from work." Her voice carried genuine distress, possibly the first honest emotion she'd displayed in months of careful neutrality. "Your husband is a thief, Vanessa. There's nothing to work out." I lifted the suitcase, surprised by how light it felt when it contained everything I truly owned. He made his choice when he decided to steal my retirement money. She followed me downstairs, wringing her hands and offering compromises that missed the fundamental point entirely. This wasn't about money anymore, though Brandon seemed incapable of understanding anything beyond financial calculations. This was about dignity, respect, and the right to control my own life after 4 decades of honest work. "The children love you. They don't understand why this is happening." Her final appeal struck closest to my heart, but even my love for Sophia and Tyler couldn't excuse their father's systematic abuse. Then Brandon should have considered their feelings before he decided to humiliate their grandfather. I opened the front door onto Maple Street, where December sunshine illuminated a neighborhood continuing its normal routine. "Tell them I love them, but I can't stay where I'm not respected." The walk down our tree-lined street felt like crossing a bridge that would burn behind me. Neighbors worked in their yards and walked their dogs, ordinary people living ordinary lives, while my personal world collapsed into something unrecognizable. "Mrs. Patterson waved from her garden, probably wondering why I was carrying a suitcase on a Tuesday morning. 3 blocks from Maple Street, I found the Riverside Inn, a modest brick building that advertised weekly rates and accepted cash without requiring credit checks or extensive documentation. The desk clerk, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and calloused hands, barely looked up from his newspaper as I approached. "Need a room?" he asked, sliding a registration card across the scarred wooden counter. "Weekly rate, please. Cash payment." I counted out $45 from my meager funds, leaving me with negative balance, but providing shelter while I figured out my next steps. Room 127 smelled of industrial disinfectant and old cigarettes, but the lock worked and the bed looked clean enough for my immediate needs. I set my suitcase on the narrow table and sat heavily on the mattress edge, suddenly feeling every one of my 62 years settling into my bones like winter cold. Rita's photograph smiled at me from my wallet, the picture I'd carried for 2 years since her accident. She'd been beautiful even during her final days in the hospital, maintaining her dignity when everything else was falling apart, just like I was trying to do now. "Rita, our son, has become someone we wouldn't recognize," I whispered to the empty room, my words mixing with traffic sounds from the street outside. "But I won't let him destroy what we built together." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight belonged to quiet planning and the strange comfort of controlling my own space for the first time in months. The Tulsa Public Library's computer terminal yielded exactly what I needed after 2 hours of careful research. The Senior Legal Aid Society on Cherry Street offered free consultations for elderly residents facing financial abuse, their website featuring testimonials from people whose children had stolen their money, manipulated their assets, or pressured them into unfavorable living arrangements. Reading those stories felt like looking into a mirror that reflected my own situation with uncomfortable clarity. I wasn't alone in this particular form of family betrayal. The website's resource section contained links to Oklahoma statutes protecting elderly citizens, federal guidelines governing Social Security benefits, and contact information for attorneys specializing in elder abuse cases. Each page I read strengthened my resolve while building a foundation of legal knowledge I hadn't possessed 24 hours earlier. 2 days of research and careful preparation led me to their modest brick building on a bright Thursday morning. The manila folder under my arm contained every document I'd managed to gather: my original house deed from 1,995 mortgage papers showing payments I'd made for 15 years, and bank statements proving my Social Security deposits. My hands shook slightly as I approached the reception desk, but determination outweighed nervousness. Eugene Caldwell to see Patricia Morrison. I have a 10 o'clock appointment. The receptionist, a kindly woman in her 50s with silver hair and gentle eyes, smiled warmly and gestured toward a row of comfortable chairs. She'll be right with you, Mr. Caldwell. Can I get you some coffee while you wait? Her offer carried the genuine hospitality that makes Oklahoma famous for neighborly kindness. Patricia Morrison emerged from a side office. 5 minutes later, a professional woman in her mid-40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense handshake. Her office walls displayed law degrees from the University of Tulsa, alongside certificates in elder advocacy and family law. The credentials suggested someone who'd dedicated her career to protecting people like me from exactly what Brandon had done. Tell me what's been happening, Mr. Caldwell. She settled behind her desk with a yellow legal pad, her pen poised to capture the details of my situation. I explained everything carefully, starting with Brandon's Halloween ultimatum and ending with Tuesday morning's devastating discovery of the stolen money. Patricia listened without interruption, occasionally making notes that suggested she was building a case strategy even as I spoke. May I examine your documents? She asked when I finished my account. The house deed seemed to capture her immediate attention. She studied it carefully, then turned to her computer and began typing with the focused intensity of someone accessing legal databases. Her eyebrows rose as she read whatever appeared on her screen. Mr. Caldwell, this house is registered solely in your name. You're the legal owner, not your son. Her voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent years navigating property law. Brandon has no ownership rights whatsoever, regardless of how long he's lived there. The words hit me like unexpected sunshine after weeks of storm clouds. But he's been paying utilities and maintenance costs for 4 years. That makes him a tenant, not an owner. What he did constitutes financial exploitation of an elderly person, which is a serious crime under Oklahoma statute 21-1123.1. Patricia leaned forward, her expression growing more serious, as she outlined the legal framework that protected people in my situation. Anyone who takes advantage of a vulnerable adult's assets can face both criminal charges and civil liability. Your son essentially stole your money and is illegally occupying your property without paying rent. For the first time in days, hope flickered in my chest like a candle being lit in a dark room. What can we do about it? We can demand immediate eviction, full compensation for the stolen money, plus retroactive rent for the 4 years he's lived there without paying market rate. She began pulling forms from her desk drawer with the efficiency of someone who'd handled similar cases many times before. I'll draft a formal demand letter requiring him to vacate the premises within 30 days and compensate you for financial damages. We'll send it certified mail to create a legal record of our demands. The next hour passed in a blur of explanations and document preparation. Patricia outlined the entire process: demand letter waiting period, potential court action if Brandon refused compliance. The legal system I'd trusted for 62 years of honest living was finally protecting me, instead of abandoning me to family manipulation. This will take time, Mr. Caldwell. Legal processes move slowly, and your son might hire his own attorney to fight our demands. Patricia sealed the completed demand letter in an official envelope bearing her law firm's letterhead. Are you prepared for a potentially lengthy battle? I thought of Rita's photograph in my wallet of the college tuition I'd sacrificed overtime hours to pay, of Tuesday morning's casual cruelty over breakfast dishes. I've been preparing for this fight my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. Tomorrow we'd mail the letter that would change everything between my son and me forever. The main post office on Denver Avenue processed certified mail with bureaucratic precision that suited my mood perfectly. Patricia stood beside me as the postal clerk attached tracking numbers and return receipt requests to the thick envelope bearing Brandon's name and my former address on Maple Street. The official legal letterhead made the document look exactly like what it was: a weapon designed to restore justice. Make sure he signs for it personally. I instructed, sliding the postal fees across the counter with money Patricia had advanced from her firm's client assistance fund. I want proof he received every word of those demands. 4 days had passed since our legal consultation, during which I'd found a small efficiency apartment in the Brookside area and begun establishing my independent life. The place cost $400 monthly, manageable once my Social Security payments resumed, and offered something Brandon's house never had: complete control over my own space and decisions. Patricia had crafted the demand letter with surgical precision, each paragraph building toward ultimatums that would force Brandon to confront the consequences of his financial abuse. Reading it one final time before mailing felt like holding a loaded weapon that could reshape the power dynamic between my son and me. This should reach him by Saturday afternoon, the postal worker confirmed, handing me the tracking receipt with its distinctive green and white design. Certified mail with return receipt requested creates an official legal record of delivery. Saturday came and went without response, which didn't surprise Patricia when I called her office Monday morning. Most people need time to process legal demands, especially when they realize how much trouble they're facing, she explained. Give him a few more days to consult an attorney. The return receipt arrived in my mailbox Tuesday morning, Brandon's hasty signature confirming delivery at 3:17 p.m. on Saturday, the 21st of December. I imagined his expression while reading those devastating paragraphs, the slow realization that his father had found both allies and ammunition in this war he'd declared over breakfast dishes. My phone rang at exactly 11 o'clock Tuesday morning, Brandon's name appearing on the screen with an urgency that suggested panic rather than anger. I let it ring 4 times before answering, savoring this reversal of power that felt better than any Christmas present. Dad, what is this legal nonsense? You can't just kick me out of our house. His voice carried the same dismissive tone he'd used during our kitchen confrontation, but underneath, I detected something new, uncertainty bordering on fear. It's not our house, Brandon. It's my house. You have 30 days to vacate and pay compensation for the money you stole. I kept my voice level, enjoying this shift in dynamics more than I'd expected. This is crazy. I've invested years improving that property, maintaining it, paying utilities with my own money. The desperation leaked through his attempt at reasonable negotiation. You can't just throw your own family onto the street. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every utility bill came from income I earned or savings I accumulated over 35 years of honest work. My words carried the weight of legal authority backing them now. You've been living rent-free in my house while stealing my retirement funds. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd hung up. When Brandon spoke again, the bluster had evaporated, completely replaced by something that sounded almost like the boy I'd raised before greed corrupted his judgment. Dad, let's talk about this reasonably. Maybe we can work out some kind of arrangement that benefits everyone. His voice cracked with the strain of maintaining composure, while his comfortable world crumbled around him. The arrangement is clearly outlined in the legal letter. 30 days to vacate $8,000 compensation for theft and emotional distress keys returned to my attorney. I paused, letting each demand sink into his consciousness. Those terms aren't negotiable. $8,000. Dad, I don't have that kind of money available right now. The admission revealed just how precarious his financial situation had become, despite his confident claims about managing household expenses. Then, you shouldn't have stolen mine. The simple truth cut through his attempts at manipulation like a blade through tissue paper. Patricia Morrison will be happy to explain Oklahoma elder abuse statutes to whatever attorney you hire. This is ridiculous. I'm calling my own lawyer tomorrow morning. Brandon's threat carried no conviction, the empty bluster of someone who'd finally realized that legal consequences were real and unavoidable. Good. Mine will enjoy the conversation. I ended the call with quiet satisfaction, finally understanding what it felt like to hold the stronger position in negotiations with my own son. For the first time in months, someone else was scrambling to respond to my actions instead of the reverse. Brandon had 30 days to decide whether his stolen comfort was worth facing criminal prosecution for elder financial abuse. The next 2 weeks transformed into methodical evidence gathering that felt more satisfying than any work I'd done since retiring from American Airlines. Patricia's office buzzed with focused energy as we spread documents across her conference table like generals planning a military campaign. Bank statements, property deeds, and witness contact information created an impressive array of evidence that would demolish Brandon's position in any courtroom. We need to establish a clear pattern of financial abuse spanning multiple years, Patricia explained, highlighting key transactions with her yellow marker. Your Social Security deposits, his unauthorized withdrawals, utility payments you made while he claimed ownership. It all builds our case for systematic exploitation. Mrs. Dorothy Henderson, my neighbor for 12 years, welcomed me into her kitchen with coffee and righteous indignation about Brandon's behavior. Her weathered hands gestured emphatically while she spoke decades of Oklahoma hospitality evident in her genuine concern for my situation. That boy never showed you proper respect, Eugene. We heard the arguments through the walls, especially after Rita's accident. She shook her head with the disapproval that comes from witnessing family dysfunction from a distance. Never saw him do yard work or house maintenance. Always you out there in all weather fixing things while he sat inside watching television. Frank Martinez across the street confirmed similar observations during our front porch conversation. Brandon treated you like hired help in your own home, Eugene. Made my wife and me sick to watch, but we figured it was family business until now. His testimony would carry weight with any jury that understood the difference between family cooperation and systematic abuse. Each witness statement strengthened our foundation, but the financial documentation provided the most damaging evidence against Brandon's claims. Bank records revealed a pattern of him accessing my pension deposits without permission, treating my retirement income as his personal allowance while contributing nothing to household expenses. We'll demand not only compensation but retroactive rent for 4 years, Patricia announced during our strategy session. Market rate for that house is $1,500 monthly. He owes you $72,000 in back rent alone. Brandon's phone calls became increasingly desperate as our court date approached. His attorney had apparently explained the weakness of claiming family arrangement without written agreements or proof of contribution to household expenses. Dad, forget this legal nonsense and come home. We can work something out like reasonable family members. His voice carried the pleading tone of someone who'd finally realized that consequences were real and unavoidable. You started this war when you stole my retirement money, Brandon. Now face the legal system you thought wouldn't protect elderly citizens. My response carried the cold certainty that comes from overwhelming evidence and moral authority. This is crazy. Vanessa's pregnant again, and we can't afford to move right now with medical expenses and everything. His revelation about another grandchild hit like unexpected ice water, but I forced myself to remain focused on justice rather than sentiment. You should have considered your family's financial situation before committing theft and fraud against your own father. The harsh truth cut through his attempts at emotional manipulation. Patricia Morrison will be happy to explain that to the judge. Meanwhile, my new life in the efficiency apartment had begun to take shape around routines that belonged entirely to me. Morning coffee tasted better when brewed according to my preferences, rather than accommodating someone else's schedule. Evening meals were simple but satisfying, cooked and consumed in peaceful silence, without the underlying tension that had poisoned every family gathering for months. Pastor Williams from First Methodist visited twice during this period, offering spiritual guidance that helped me separate my love for Brandon from my need to hold him accountable for his actions. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to face the consequences of their choices, he counseled during our second conversation. The church community had rallied around my situation with the kind of support that makes small-town Oklahoma special. Casseroles appeared regularly on my doorstep, accompanied by notes of encouragement from people who understood that family loyalty shouldn't require accepting financial abuse. Patricia filed our eviction papers with Tulsa County Court on the 15th of January, requesting expedited hearing due to elder abuse circumstances. The court clerk stamped our documents with satisfying efficiency, scheduling oral arguments for the 8th of February, exactly 3 weeks away. Time enough for Brandon to understand that legal consequences were inevitable, and for me to savor the approaching moment when justice would finally prevail over family manipulation. The boy I'd raised to respect hard work and integrity was about to learn that actions have consequences, even when committed against one's own father. Judge Robert Martinez's courtroom commanded respect, with its polished wood paneling and stern portraits of previous jurists who had dispensed justice from the same bench for decades. I straightened my best tie, the same navy blue one I'd worn to Rita's memorial service, and took my seat beside Patricia at the plaintiff's table. The weight of this moment settled on my shoulders like Oklahoma summer heat. Brandon sat across the aisle with his attorney Thomas Chen, a young lawyer who kept shuffling papers nervously and whispering urgent consultations with his clearly unprepared client. My son looked haggard, his usually pristine appearance betraying sleepless nights and mounting stress that comes from facing the consequences of systematic theft. Case number 2025CV1247. Caldwell versus Caldwell, the bailiff announced. Eviction proceedings with claims of elder financial abuse. Judge Martinez reviewed our filed documents with practiced efficiency before addressing both legal teams. His weathered face suggested decades of experience separating truth from manipulation in cases exactly like ours. This case involves serious allegations of financial exploitation against an elderly parent. I expect clear evidence and professional conduct from all parties. His voice carried the authority that makes American courtrooms temples of justice rather than mere administrative buildings. Patricia rose with calm confidence, her opening statement painting a devastating picture of systematic abuse spanning 4 years. She presented bank records showing my Social Security deposits flowing directly into accounts. Brandon controlled utility bills I'd paid, while he claimed property ownership and maintenance receipts, proving I'd funded all household expenses. The defendant has essentially stolen his father's retirement income while forcing him to live as an unpaid tenant in his own home. Patricia declared, her voice carrying the moral outrage. I felt but couldn't express myself. This represents textbook elder financial abuse under Oklahoma statute. Mrs. Henderson testified with passionate clarity about years of witnessed mistreatment. Brandon screamed at his father, constantly treated him like a servant rather than the man who'd sacrificed everything for his education and success. Her words carried the weight of 12 years observing our family dysfunction from next door. Frank Martinez confirmed similar observations, while our bank manager verified the unauthorized access patterns that proved Brandon's systematic theft. Each piece of evidence built toward an inevitable conclusion that even Thomas Chen's desperate objections couldn't undermine. When called to testify, I spoke quietly but firmly about 4 decades of honest work, the sacrifices I'd made for Brandon's college education, and the betrayal of having my retirement money stolen by the son I'd raised to value. Integrity above personal gain. Your Honor, I worked 35 years welding aircraft engines so that boy could have opportunities I never had. I sold my car to pay his college tuition, worked double shifts to keep food on our table, and trusted him with my financial security when his mother died. My voice remained steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm my composure. In return, he stole my retirement money while I slept and demanded I pay rent to live in the house I'd owned for 20 years. That's not family loyalty. It's criminal exploitation. Brandon's own testimony proved disastrous under Patricia's cross-examination. He admitted taking my money without permission, couldn't provide receipts for claimed household contributions, and eventually broke down when forced to acknowledge the depth of his ingratitude. Mr. Caldwell, did you have your father's written permission to withdraw his Social Security benefits? Patricia asked with surgical precision. No, but I was managing household expenses. Brandon's voice cracked as the weakness of his position became apparent to everyone in the courtroom. So you stole money from your 62-year-old father who had trusted you with access to his accounts. Her follow-up question hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Thomas Chen's defense crumbled under the weight of evidence and moral authority. His claims about implied family agreements met skeptical questioning from Judge Martinez, who demanded written documentation that didn't exist. Your Honor, my client has lived in that house for 4 years, Chen argued desperately. Surely that establishes some form of tenancy rights or ownership interest. Squatters' rights don't apply to family relationships, Counselor Judge Martinez replied dryly. Without rental agreements or proof of compensation, your client has been living as a guest who stole from his host. The judge's verdict carried the finality of absolute justice. The evidence unequivocally proves Mr. Eugene Caldwell's property ownership and his son's systematic financial exploitation. I hereby order immediate eviction within 60 days, compensation of $10,000 for emotional distress and retroactive rent of $60,000 for 4 years of unauthorized occupancy. Brandon's anguished cry echoed through the courtroom as the gavel fell, but I felt only quiet satisfaction. After months of humiliation and betrayal, the American legal system had vindicated my dignity and restored my rights. April sunlight streamed through the windows of my efficiency apartment as I reviewed the bank notification on my phone screen. Another electronic transfer had arrived from Brandon Caldwell in the amount of $2,000, the third installment of his court-ordered payments. Chase Bank's automated system chimed pleasantly whenever his monthly transfers appeared in my account, a sound that had become as regular and satisfying as church bells on Sunday morning. 2 months had passed since Judge Martinez's verdict, and Brandon's compliance with the court order had been punctual, if not enthusiastic. The first payment arrived exactly 7 days after the judgment, accompanied by a brief email from Thomas Chen, confirming his client's intention to fulfill all legal obligations without further litigation. Mr. Caldwell, another payment received from your son, Jennifer Martinez, informed me during my weekly bank visit, her professional smile carrying the warmth that comes from witnessing justice finally served. The automatic transfers are working perfectly. Justice has a pleasant sound to it, I replied, endorsing the deposit slip with satisfaction that never seemed to diminish despite the routine nature of these transactions. Brandon had vacated the Maple Street house within the court-mandated 60 days, moving his family to a modest rental property in South Tulsa that better matched their actual financial capabilities. The transition hadn't been smooth, according to neighbors who reported shouting matches and moving trucks, arriving at odd hours, but my son had ultimately chosen compliance over contempt of court charges. Vanessa had found full-time work at St. Francis Hospital, her nursing degree finally providing the family income that Brandon's warehouse management salary couldn't stretch to cover. The twins were enrolled in a different school district, their young lives disrupted by their father's poor choices, but hopefully learning valuable lessons about consequences and accountability. My own life had transformed in ways I hadn't anticipated when this legal battle began. The efficiency apartment that had seemed like temporary shelter during my darkest period now felt like a launching pad for adventures I'd postponed during 43 years of marriage and child-rearing. Florida beckoned with winter warmth and old friends from American Airlines, who'd retired years earlier to communities designed for people our age. The photography classes at Tulsa Community College filled Tuesday evenings with creative pursuits I'd never had time to explore during my working years, while my instructor praised my eye for capturing the city's mixture of oil, industry heritage, and modern renewal. Eugene, you have a natural talent for finding beauty in unexpected places. Carol Stevens had commented during last week's session reviewing my shots of downtown Tulsa's Art Deco buildings against storm clouds. Have you considered entering some competitions? The social calendar at First Methodist Church introduced possibilities I hadn't considered since Rita's death. Bridge tournaments, book clubs, and carefully organized dinner gatherings where conversation flowed easier than I'd expected after years of family tension. Margaret O'Brien, a widow from the photography class, shared my appreciation for quiet museums and afternoon concerts at the Tulsa Philharmonic. Brandon called on Easter Sunday, his voice carrying a humility that replaced his former arrogance, like spring replacing winter. The conversation lasted 20 minutes, during which he apologized repeatedly and asked tentatively about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship. Dad, I understand now what I put you through. The stress, the humiliation, the financial fear. I never realized how cruel I was being. His words carried the weight of someone who'd learned hard lessons about family loyalty and personal responsibility. You taught me to be strong, Brandon. Now you're learning to be accountable. My response wasn't harsh, but it wasn't immediately forgiving either. Trust would require years to rebuild if it could be rebuilt at all. The monthly payments aren't the burden I thought they'd be. Vanessa's hospital job covers them, and we're learning to live within our actual means, instead of depending on other people's money. His admission revealed a maturity that had been absent during our kitchen confrontations. Perhaps we can have coffee sometime. I offered carefully on neutral ground with no expectations except conversation. I'd like that, Dad. I'd like that very much. The relief in his voice suggested he'd been hoping for exactly this kind of olive branch. Evening light painted my small apartment gold as I prepared dinner for a meal, chosen for taste rather than budget, cooked in my own time without pressure or interference from family obligations. The telephone would ring occasionally with social invitations, travel opportunities, or simply friends checking on my well-being. Tomorrow would bring another photography expedition with Carol, then lunch at the senior center, where my story had inspired other elderly residents to seek legal help for similar family problems. Next month promised Florida sunshine and reunions with colleagues who'd escaped Oklahoma winters for communities built around retirement dreams. Rita's photograph smiled from my windowsill, surrounded by flowers. I'd finally had time to tend properly. Somewhere, across town, Brandon was learning to live honestly while honoring debts to the father he'd betrayed. The balance felt exactly right. June sunlight filtered through the oak trees, lining Maple Street as I turned the key in the front door of my house for the first time in 6 months. The lock turned smoothly, welcoming me home to rooms that finally belonged to me, without question or compromise. The air inside carried the stale scent of abandonment, but underneath I could detect traces of the home Rita and I had built together over 20 years of marriage and hard work. Brandon had left the house in better condition than I'd expected. His family's hasty departure evident in forgotten items tucked behind furniture and small repairs that revealed his grudging respect for the property he'd been forced to abandon. The walls bore faint rectangles where his family photographs had hung ghost images of a life built on financial foundations he'd never acknowledged or appreciated. My first priority was opening every window to let Oklahoma summer air sweep away the staleness of abandonment, Cross breezes carried the scent of Mrs. Henderson's rose garden and the distant aroma of barbecue from neighborhood gatherings, familiar smells that reminded me why I'd chosen this street decades ago when Rita and I were young and full of dreams about building something permanent. The restoration work began slowly but deliberately, each improvement reflecting my tastes, rather than accommodating someone else's preferences. The kitchen walls were repainted in the warm yellow Rita had always favored, while the living room returned to the soft blue that made evening reading more pleasant. Every brushstroke felt like reclaiming territory that had been occupied by ungrateful tenants. Eugene, it's wonderful to see you back home, Mrs. Henderson called from her front porch as I carried paint supplies from my truck. Her genuine pleasure at my return reminded me how much I'd missed having neighbors who remembered me as more than just Brandon's aging father. It feels good to be back, Dorothy. The house needs work, but it's got good bones. I gestured toward the fresh paint on the front door, a deep green that Rita had always said looked distinguished against the brick exterior. Frank Martinez appeared with his toolbox before I'd even asked for help, his generosity typical of the neighborhood spirit that makes Oklahoma communities special. That front step's been wobbly since Brandon moved out, he observed, kneeling to examine the loose boards. Let me fix that properly so you don't have safety issues. The next 3 weeks transformed into the most satisfying work I'd done since retiring from American Airlines. Each repair and improvement felt purposeful in ways that my old job never had, because I was building something for myself rather than fulfilling someone else's requirements. The house responded to my attention like a neglected garden receiving water and sunlight. Rita's photographs found places of honor throughout rooms painted in colors we'd chosen together during our early years of marriage. The garden bloomed with flowers she'd loved, tended by hands that finally had time to nurture growing things, instead of working double shifts to pay other people's expenses. Patricia Morrison stopped by during the final week of restoration, her professional satisfaction evident as she surveyed the transformation I'd accomplished through patient work and careful planning. This place looks like a completely different house, Eugene. You've created something beautiful here. She accepted my offer of iced tea on the front porch. Settling into the rocking chair, I'd refinished to match Rita's specifications from old photographs. It feels like home again, instead of just shelter, I replied, watching neighbors tend their own yards with the contentment that comes from belonging somewhere by right rather than sufferance. Brandon never understood that a house becomes a home through care and investment, not just occupation. The final touch came when I hung Rita's favorite wind chimes on the front porch, their gentle melody carrying across the neighborhood like a song of homecoming. The sound had been absent for 4 years, silenced by Brandon's preference for television noise over natural music. That evening, I cooked my first dinner in the restored kitchen, a simple meal prepared with ingredients chosen for taste rather than budget constraints. The house felt larger somehow, as if removing the tension of unwelcome occupation had expanded its actual dimensions. My phone rang as I was washing dishes, Brandon's name appearing on the screen with less frequency but more genuine purpose than his desperate calls during our legal battle. Dad, I drove by the house today. It looks incredible. Better than it ever did when we lived there. His voice carried genuine admiration rather than the calculating assessment that had characterized his previous comments about the property. Thank you, son. It's good to have a home again instead of just a place to sleep. My response carried no bitterness, only the satisfaction of someone who'd reclaimed what belonged to him through legal means and honest effort. The conversation lasted only 10 minutes, but it ended with tentative plans for Sunday dinner in neutral territory, where we could continue the slow process of rebuilding trust between father and son. Some wounds heal completely, while others leave scars that serve as reminders of lessons learned through painful experience. September evenings in Tulsa carry a special quality of light that photographers call the golden hour, when the sun hangs low enough to paint everything in warm amber tones. I sat on my front porch in Rita's restored rocking chair, watching neighbors tend their gardens and children play in yards that had witnessed this same peaceful routine for decades. The wind chimes sang their gentle melody, a sound that had become the soundtrack to my reclaimed life. 9 months had passed since Brandon's Halloween ultimatum had shattered my world, and the journey from victim to victor had taught me lessons I never expected to learn at 62 years old. The monthly payments from my son arrived with clockwork precision, each electronic transfer a reminder that actions have consequences and justice, though sometimes delayed, ultimately prevails. Margaret O'Brien joined me for coffee most Tuesday mornings, our friendship having evolved from photography classmates to something deeper and more meaningful. Her own experience with family financial manipulation had created a bond between us that transcended mere companionship. "You know what I admire most about your story, Eugene," she said during our most recent conversation, settling into the porch chair Frank Martinez had built to match Rita's rocker. "You never lost your dignity, even when Brandon was treating you like a dependent rather than the man who'd raised him. Rita always said that dignity comes from within, not from how other people treat you." I poured fresh coffee from the thermal carafe, enjoying the simple pleasure of hospitality, offered freely rather than grudgingly. But I'll admit there were moments when I wondered if fighting back was worth the emotional cost. The truth was more complex than Margaret's admiration suggested. The legal battle had required reserves of strength I hadn't known I possessed, drawing on lessons learned through 43 years of marriage, 35 years of honest work, and the grief of losing Rita to an accident that had left me vulnerable to Brandon's manipulation. Pastor Williams had provided crucial guidance during the darkest periods, helping me separate my love for Brandon from my need to hold him accountable for his actions. "Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is allow people to face the consequences of their choices," he'd counseled during one particularly difficult session. The senior community at First Methodist had rallied around my situation with support that reminded me why small-town values still matter in modern America. Casseroles appeared regularly during the legal proceedings, accompanied by notes of encouragement from people who understood that family loyalty shouldn't require accepting financial abuse. "Eugene, your story has inspired 3 other families in our congregation to seek legal help for similar situations," Pastor Williams had reported just last Sunday. "Elder financial abuse is more common than most people realize, but your courage to fight back has given others hope." The photography classes had evolved into something beyond creative pursuit, becoming a metaphor for how perspective shapes reality. Through Carol Stevens' patient instruction, I'd learned to find beauty in unexpected places, much like discovering strength in circumstances that initially seemed hopeless. "Your eye for composition has improved dramatically," Carol observed during our most recent session reviewing my latest shots of downtown Tulsa's Art Deco architecture. "But more importantly, you've learned to see possibilities where others might see only problems." Brandon and I had shared 3 Sunday dinners at neutral restaurants, carefully structured meetings that allowed us to rebuild trust without the pressure of returning to old family dynamics. His transformation from entitled manipulator to accountable adult had been gradual but genuine. "Dad, I understand now that taking your money wasn't just theft. It was stealing your independence and dignity," he'd admitted during our most recent conversation. "I'm grateful the legal system forced me to face what I'd become." Vanessa's pregnancy had progressed smoothly, and their 3rd child would arrive in December, with a name chosen to honor Rita's memory. The gesture felt like genuine remorse rather than calculated manipulation, though trust would require years to fully restore. The house had become more than just shelter. It was a symbol of what persistence and legal justice could accomplish when elderly citizens refused to accept abuse from their own families. Every room reflected choices made freely rather than under duress, creating an environment that nurtured rather than diminished my sense of self-worth. Evening light faded into twilight as I finished my coffee and prepared to go inside. Tomorrow would bring another photography expedition with Margaret, then lunch at the senior center, where my advice helped other families navigate similar battles against financial exploitation. Rita's photograph smiled from the windowsill, surrounded by flowers that bloomed, because I finally had time and freedom to tend them properly. Somewhere across town, Brandon was learning to live honestly while honoring his obligations to the father he'd betrayed and ultimately learned to respect again. The balance felt exactly right, built on foundations of justice, accountability, and the slow healing that comes when people choose truth over convenience. Some battles are worth fighting, especially when the alternative is surrendering your dignity to someone else's greed. 1 year had passed since that Halloween evening, when Brandon's ultimatum had shattered my world, and now I raised my coffee cup in a quiet toast to second chances and hard-won justice. The monthly payments arrived with clockwork precision, each electronic transfer a reminder that standing up for yourself is never too late even at 62. My house bore fresh improvements that reflected my tastes, rather than accommodating someone else's preferences, while Rita's photographs occupied places of honor throughout rooms painted in colors we'd chosen together decades ago. Brandon called every Sunday now, his voice carrying genuine humility as he learned to rebuild trust through consistent actions rather than empty promises. Vanessa had delivered their 3rd child in December, a daughter named Rita, in honor of the grandmother she'd never meet, but whose strength lived on through the man who'd refused to surrender his dignity to family greed. The legal system had worked exactly as it should, protecting an elderly citizen from financial abuse, while teaching valuable lessons about accountability and respect. Sometimes the greatest battles we fight aren't against strangers or circumstances, but against the people we love most who've forgotten the values we tried to teach them. My journey from victim to victor had required reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed, drawing on lessons learned through 43 years of marriage, 35 years of honest work, and the wisdom that comes from surviving loss and betrayal. America's legal system exists to protect citizens like me from exactly what Brandon had done, but it only works when we have the courage to use it. Elder financial abuse thrives in silence and shame, but justice flourishes when we refuse to accept mistreatment from anyone, including our own children. The community support I'd received from neighbors, church members, and legal professionals reminded me why small-town values still matter in our modern world. Sometimes standing up for yourself is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved, teaching lessons that words alone could never convey. Evening light painted my kitchen, the same golden color it had that Halloween night when this journey began. But now the warmth came from contentment rather than the artificial cheerfulness of decorations masking family dysfunction. The wind chimes sang their gentle melody on the front porch, Rita's favorite sound restored to a home that finally felt like sanctuary rather than prison. Somewhere across town, Brandon was learning to live honestly while honoring his obligations to the father who'd taught him that actions have consequences. The balance felt exactly right, built on foundations of justice, accountability, and the healing that comes when truth prevails over convenience. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey with Eugene Caldwell. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.